Attkisson. She's an Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist. She's got an Edward R. Murrow Award, host of Full Measure, which you can watch right here on Channel 30 in St. Louis on Sundays. Sharyl, I appreciate you joining us. I've admired your work for a long time. I was a journalist here in St. Louis at the CBS affiliate, and I've been watching your investigative reports for years. Thanks for giving us some time today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let me start off by having you talk about your own experiences with electronic surveillance, or at least somebody trying to hack into your computers. The reports I've read, it happened during your investigation of what happened in Benghazi.
It actually started even before that, but was going on during the Benghazi investigations. And I was doing reporting on various Obama administration stories I was assigned to or dug up myself, much as I'd done under President Bush, winning Emmy Awards investigating him. Did the same under Obama, but there was super aggressive pushback at the same time. The Obama administration was waging its war on whistleblowers, as they say, and was surveilling Associated Press and a Fox News reporter and all kinds of things. Well, none of that was known at the time, but some sources approached me connected to the government and informed me that I was likely being surveilled because of my work. I was, really stunned because I'd never contemplated such a thing. And again, this was pre-Edward Snowden. But I was able, through my connections, to have a forensics exam by somebody familiar with the software government uses in its intel work, and it confirmed that I was subjected to long-term surveillance with all kinds of software and tricks in my CBS work computer. CBS hired its own forensics examiner since my source couldn't come forward. It was confidential. That confirmed the same thing, and I also hired a third forensics examiner for my lawsuit who has found that and more evidence, including evidence of a government-owned IP address that was accessing my computer. So there's really no forensics that's better than that to prove government tie to this operation. In my lawsuit, the government is blocking us from finding out who had access to that government-owned IP address. Seems to me this could be cleared up fairly quickly if they would give us the information we seek, but the Department of Justice has been blocking us every step of the way.
That's pretty amazing. Do you suspect it was the administration pushing this?
Well, I have a source who told me, I don't use the name frequently publicly because this is just sourced with a confidential source, but told me who was responsible, and it is an administration person, and it makes sense because these are people who were working behind the scenes with CBS to try to stop my reporting and doing other aggressive tactics. So I do believe it was an administration-related effort. I don't have a lot of details as to who specifically wrote an order or issued some sort of, what would you say, some sort of authority to go forward with an operation like that. But I found so much interesting information in the course of these years, the last couple of years, from insiders who've helped me understand what might have been going on. And did you know that even without a wiretap, I'm told by firsthand sources, a president can issue something called a directive that allows illegal acts to be conducted domestically and internationally in the interest, if the case is made by somebody that's in the national interest. And this directive, I'm told, comes with a cover story that if the operation is exposed, it would be told. It comes with indemnity for those involved. They're allowed to lie about their involvement, and they will never be prosecuted. They'll be indemnified from responsibility. So there's all kinds of ways that American citizens could be wrapped up in certain operations that would be very difficult to learn about. It may not just be a typical FISA court warrant, for example.
Interesting. And in this particular case, I haven't read your lawsuit, but I assume you believe the motivation was simply because they wanted to get to your sources, correct?
Well, I suspect, based on my sources, that I was wrapped up, at least the explanation for why they were watching me, something that I was told was never done like this prior to this time. Journalists were always considered pretty much, hands-off territory. But the justification may have been the whistleblowers I deal with. Again, the government was surveilling and conducting a war on whistleblowers. There were government officials going after the Fast and Furious ATF agent who I broke the story with, some years ago. They were, by all accounts, trying to frame him. One government official even was fired after releasing some confidential information about him to the press. So there were all kinds of things going on at the time that could have wrapped me up into this justification for wiretapping, or at least listening in, even if not an official wiretap.
Yeah, I don't want to read into something here that you're not saying, but when I think of the president's claims, that's been in the news today, that he's facing a deadline to somehow prove his claims that he was wiretapped in Trump Tower. I mean, is it possible that what we've got here is just a semantics issue? If you replace the word wiretapped with electronically surveilled, does that give it more credibility based on your experience?
Well, I haven't looked into the Trump claims, so I can't speak to those. But do I think it's possible? Absolutely. Of course it is. I mean, New York Times and USA Today reported specifically that a wiretap picked up conversation with General Flynn. Presumably they were wiretapping or surveilling the Russian ambassador. But they said there was a wiretap. So is it outrageous to think that there were other wiretaps, or at least surveillance, like you say, if the semantics are not exactly correct, of other Trump officials? I don't think that's a ridiculous claim, but I don't know that it's true either.
Yeah, I wondered when I saw the WikiLeaks release last week. That kind of puts a shiver down your spine, and you were probably already aware of at least the possibility of some of that because of your own experience.
Well, I wrote about a lot of that in my book, that again, my sources had already told me my computer was turned on by itself, that Skype, the application Skype, was used to access audio. I wouldn't know that it was on, but it was being used to listen in, and that they can use Skype to exfiltrate files from your computer. I knew that they can control vehicles, sort of remote control, as well as installing devices in vehicles to make them operate, as they wish. I know that they can make TVs, come on secretly, and you don't know that they're on. So these things sound very James Bondish when I wrote about them, probably to a lot of people in 2014. But as you see, this isn't the CIA material. This is very, very real stuff, and probably a lot of things we don't even know about.
Yeah, that's frightening. I know you've got a new book coming out called The Smear, how shady political operatives and fake news control what you see, what you think, and how you vote. Very interesting. Tell me a little bit about your book.
It's a bit of a sequel to Stonewalled, and it talks about how these forces are shaping and manipulating the images we see every day on the news, online, fake accounts on social media, government operatives maintaining software that allows them to hire actors to, have 10 to 20 Facebook accounts apiece with false identities, to start movements, to circulate things on Twitter. How they infiltrate the news. There's the transactional journalism, as I call it, that we know about, where journalists are dealing behind the scenes with political operatives in what I think are inappropriate ways. But there are also incidents where we've, I think quite literally in the media, allowed ourselves to be infiltrated by political and corporate operatives by hiring them as pundits and reporters and journalists and managers, which is why I maintain that when you see news today that is extremely biased or mistakes are made that wouldn't have been allowed, 5 years ago, the reporter would have been kind of drummed out of the business, but now they're overlooked or the reporter is even promoted. I think that's because now many in the media are serving a narrative. They're not there to do journalism. They're there to advance political narratives and themes, and we've allowed that in the media, unfortunately.
Having been somebody who's been involved at the network news level for so long, I've been involved locally, obviously, for many years, but never on the national scene like you were. How did you feel about the president's aggressiveness towards certain news outlets that he perceives to be hostile to his administration? Because if what you're telling me has happened to your own computer from the Obama administration, you've kind of been a victim of that from a previous administration.
Well, I think this is to be expected from political operations, no matter, which end of the spectrum they're from. But I think people may be confused by the idea that Trump says what's on his mind, and I think he's not that hard to figure out. He does so for a reason. President Obama spoke very nicely, and I guess people thought that was great. But by all accounts, even by letters signed by the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, every journalism organization I know, The Obama administration was the worst that they and we had ever experienced in terms of transparency and other matters with the press. We said so in writing over and over. It just wasn't covered in the news as a news story, but we raised many objections. It was unprecedented. So I guess, if the public thinks or reporters like to report that what Trump is doing is outrageously egregious and yet not see what the Obama administration did with its war on whistleblowers and in some case journalists, threatening to put one in prison at least that I know of, I don't see one action as better than the other. I certainly don't think the Obama administration did right by the press in many instances. And you look at freedom of information, stonewalling, and all that sort of thing, and I think they broke all records. And Trump may yet further that and break more. But it's not as though we were coming from a place where journalism and the relationship with the president, at least behind the scenes, was a good one because it wasn't proper, in my view.
Well put. I look forward to reading the book. I know people can pre-order it already on Amazon, but it doesn't come out till June, correct?
Yeah, June 27th. But would invite pre-orders. I think that's great to show the support for the book. And I think we're number one on Amazon in new releases under propaganda and news category, which is great. But I would also, one more comment in the news. Everybody's talking about Trump's war on the media, and I may be writing an article about this in the next week if I have time. In my view, we started it. I mean, it's pretty funny to act as though he somehow out of the blue hated the media. The media made it very clear, and I recount some of this in my book. Starting in July, the year he announced, they took unprecedented actions by their own admission to aggressively cover and sometimes misrepresent this president. And I think it's kind of, again, he's not that hard to figure out. When he's hit, tries to hit back harder. And I think that's what he's doing, and there's political purpose to it. But it's not as though it came out of the blue. And every time I hear someone talk about the war he started with the media, I kind of chuckle and think, where were you when this all started? Because that's not how it began.
It's a great point. Sharyl Attkisson, where can people go to find out more about Full Measure?
Fullmeasure.news. And if you miss the program, you can catch segments there, all the time. We post them, and it's also live streamed there on Sundays as well as on TV. So we try to have something different. We do have things different than you'll see on every other show every week. So if you're sick of hearing the same thing on the news over and over and over again all week, I promise you'll hear something different on our program. You're
singing to the choir here. That's refreshing to hear. Sharyl Attkisson, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
I was walking down the street when out the corner of my eye I saw a pretty little thing approaching me. She said, "I never seen a man who looks so all alone. Could you use a little company?"
This hour of The Mark Cox Show brought to you by Thomas Helbig, the official St. Louis financial advisor of The Mark Cox Show.
Well, it's time to talk about flu season because that's still going around. Several schools had to close early last week because so many kids were sick. If you're not cleaning your home properly, that stuff can linger. I don't worry about it because we have the maids who come to our house, and they know how to clean things, to disinfect the doorknobs and the light switches and the remote controls and all of the things that might hold on to those germs for you, even for any length of time. They're even cleaning the hinges on the toilet seat. That's how down and dirty they get with the maids, let's put it that way. So you can make life easier on yourself and take the stress off a little bit and let the maids take care of it. They pull up in that bright yellow car. Powerhouse team of 4 people will come in and they will clean your house properly. They clean to a higher standard. That's what they pride themselves on at the maids. So go to the